All right, welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. We're looking forward to the presentation. I'll introduce you to our panelists in just a moment. But while people continue to log on and get ready to join the webinar with us today, we'd like to start by just going over a couple of logistics. Like most webinars, the audio on this will be one way. You will be able to hear us, but we will not be able to hear you. But you do have the ability to ask us questions, and we will go through the presentation, but at the end we've reserved time for Q&A and can stay here actually up to 1:30 if that's needed, for depending on how much dialogue we have. If you have a question, open up your GoToWebinar control panel, and you'll see a part of it where it says questions, and click on that little arrow. And it will open that, and you type your question in to that little box at the bottom. You click send, and that will send us the question, and we will be able to see it. We'll keep track of the questions, and at the end of the webinar, we will pull them up and respond to them. Our plan for today, we're going to start by introducing our panelists. Then we're going to share a short video that really is the 3-minute version of our hour-long webinar and give you a sense of the big picture of the topic that we're going to be talking through. And then we'll break that down. Melissa, Craig, and I will walk through each of the steps that are outlined in the video and talk about what's really important to think about in that. We'll close with some words of wisdom, and we'll move into the Q&A period. With that, I would like to ask our panelists to introduce yourselves. To Melissa, I've lost your camera feed, so I'm not seeing you right now. And there you are. Melissa, would you introduce yourself? Okay, sorry about that. We seem to be having a little bit of difficulty here. Sarah and Mike, our organizers, if you could maybe text Melissa or help her through.
I am back connected.
Okay,
forgive me for that.
Right, okay, great. Well, welcome back. If you'd like to start us off with introduction.
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Melissa Pritchard. I'm a managing principal at SFCS Architects. I apologize for the network blip there. I'm sure we've all experienced plenty of those as we're in these working conditions. For those of you who aren't familiar with SFCS, we are a research-based professional architecture, engineering, planning, and interior design firm with offices in Roanoke, Virginia, Charlotte, North Carolina, Philadelphia, and Louisville, Kentucky. We are celebrating our 100-year anniversary this year of providing architectural services, and 76 of those years have been focused on design for seniors. We've provided master planning and repositioning services to over 500 senior living communities across the nation. Rob and Craig, I'm excited to be a part of this panel with you, and thank you for having me.
Thanks. Craig?
Good morning. My name is Craig Witz. I'm based here in Madison, Wisconsin, but I work around the country. I'm really excited to be here with Rob and Melissa on this session. When Rob called and asked me about this, I was really excited to be part of this because good master planning is something near and dear to my heart. I've worked on some projects that have just been really problematic because of poor master planning, and I've had the benefit to work on some that were almost magical in terms of what the end result of the master plan was. So it's a really, really critical piece of the puzzle in development. Just 5 seconds about me. I tell people I'm kind of a one-trick pony. I've worked in senior living development my entire career. I started out with a couple of the large national, regional firms, and then went out on my own. I've worked on projects around the country. Just a few weeks ago, helped out the Rose Villa team with their $78 million financing and their construction start, and currently working on projects in Connecticut and Illinois and Georgia. But again, really excited to be part of this team.
Great. Thank you, Craig. And I am Rob Love. I am the president owner of Love & Company. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, we are a market research, marketing, branding and creative, and sales management firm that specializes solely in the senior living field. Melissa, we've only been around for 40 years, not 100. So I doubt that we'll ever catch up there. But for more than 25 years, we've been dedicated, strictly to the senior living field. So on behalf of Love & Company, again, I would like to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us today. So as we were getting ready to do this and planning for this, I'm thinking through all my introductory comments, and this has been a really challenging time in senior living. Of course, these past several months, everything's been turned upside down. And the attention of our executive teams, of staff, of our residents, everything is, how do we get through this in a good, positive way? I know some communities are struggling with census. I'm racking my brain thinking, how am I going to come up with a dynamic opening to this that lets people know that, hey, it's also really important to be planning for the future? And then it hit me. Those of you who decided to join us today to learn about master planning, you are those people that are already thinking about the future and know that there's more to everything we need to do to be successful in senior living than just getting through these months of challenges. So again, thank you and commendations to you, both for being the planners and having the foresight to attend today, but also just for everything you do to keep our communities going during these challenging times. But of course, the world is changing faster and faster, and senior living must adapt to that changing world. So I actually think that master planning is going to become more important than ever, because in many ways, many of the things that we need to plan and think about are going to be different now than they were in the past. How do we adapt to basically, I hate the terminology, we hear it all the time, the new world or the new way, but we do. We have to adapt. Now, one thing that is sort of the foundation of this presentation in a way is that if you're looking to do master planning in 2021 to really start some initiatives, then 2020 is really the time to make sure you get your homework done so that you can launch that planning process with the right information for your team. You're going to hear a lot about that as we talk through things today. And in fact, one of the basic premises of where we're going to go today, and even of the video that I'm going to share with you in just a moment, is that the market demand analysis has already been done. And you understand that, yes, there is demand. You understand where your community fits relative to the competition. You really understand those market dynamics. And with that information, which you'll see all the team members need to have to do a great job, then you can start the planning process. So we're not going to spend any real time today on the market intelligence and market studies. The assumption is that's in place. So with that as a background, let's go ahead and show you this roughly 3-minute video, and then we'll come on and expand on all the concepts that are in here.
Congratulations. Your organization has made the decision to grow, committing to a multi-million-dollar investment. To arrive at this decision, you engaged a marketing firm to evaluate the market, determine there is an appropriate opportunity. As CEO, you are now tasked with the exciting but challenging responsibility of steering development toward success, effectively and cost efficiently. An interactive, team-based master planning process is the best way for you and your team to have timely discussions about challenges and opportunities, to make quick decisions, and to draw on the strengths and experience of every member of the team right from the start. In this process, different team members take the lead at different times, with all contributing at each stage, so you can develop a sound plan before committing to the major costs of implementation. The first step is to assemble your team. We recommend a project manager, architect, financial analyst, construction planner, and a marketing firm. Your project manager schedules and leads a kickoff meeting, making sure each team member understands the goals of the development, has a clear understanding of their responsibilities, and establishes an overall timetable with due dates for the project, including regularly scheduled team communication. Building on its original market study and the overall direction you provide, marketing then takes the lead in creating a vision for the project by developing a project definition that includes the number, types, and sizes of residences, amenities needed, the service package included with the new residences, and contract and pricing recommendations. At the same time, your financial analyst begins building pro formas to evaluate financial feasibility, while the architect reviews the site to determine the need for renovations and the best locations for growth. You and your team then meet again. Together, you review the project definition recommendations, draw on each other's collective experience and insights to fine-tune the plan, estimate the amount of space needed for new residences and amenities, and estimate what space will need to be renovated or developed. Your financial analyst then estimates changes to the operating expenses, explores financing options, and enters the program information, including costs provided by the construction planner, into the financial model. With these results, you now have a clear understanding of the financial performance of the project and whether any initial program assumptions need to be updated before moving forward. Once you are confident the model meets your financial goals, your architect begins conceptual design, developing multiple layout options and working with your team to refine the concepts and explore level of finish options, which your team uses to fine-tune construction estimates. Once again, your financial analyst updates the financial model, working alongside the entire team to fine-tune and adjust all the plan components until you are confident the project meets your financial goals. As a final step, marketing conducts consumer research to ensure the newly refined project success. Marketing shares the plans with prospective residents, gaining valuable feedback on floor plans, level of finishes, service and amenity options, and projected pricing. These findings inform the team if any additional fine-tuning is needed. With the research results in hand, you are confident you have a project that meets the needs of the market and will be successful. You and your team present the plan to your board of directors. The board can see clearly that everything has been carefully considered and analyzed, and the plan is viable. Congratulations. With board approval in hand, your organization is ready to move forward with development.
All right. By the way, that video has been very helpful with a lot of organizations in terms of educating board members and staff and leadership of what's really involved in the whole development process. So if you would, well, we will email out a link to everyone following the webinar. And by the way, we will also, this is one of the most popular questions, will we send out a copy of the webinar? Yes, this is being recorded, and a copy of the full recording will be sent not only to everybody who is attending today, but also everyone that registered and could not attend. We will also send you a link to that video in case it's helpful with educating your board and staff on what this process really can and should look like. So with that, Craig, please lead us off into the first step.
Sure. So the benefits to having basically all hands on deck or everybody on board at the beginning, it absolutely saves time and dollars. And Melissa's going to talk more about that in detail in a few minutes. The master planning process is inherently, it's collaborative, it's interactive, it's multidisciplinary. The thing that fascinates me through the process is that everyone on that team is looking at the world and looking at the project differently. So the board members, the CEO, the CFO, the architect, the market analysis, the marketing team, the pre-construction, they are all looking at this differently. And so ultimately, the benefit of having one up is you achieve balance because you're getting all of those perspectives, and it really has to work for all of those perspectives. So who should be there is part of the master planning process. Clearly, obviously, the leadership of the community, be it the CEO, the CFO, if there's a COO, department heads. Clearly, the facilities director should be at all of the meetings. I've worked with some communities where they will cycle in and out some of the other department heads through the process, but I've also had it where all the key department heads are also there. It's really critical to have board members there, typically 1 to 3 board members as part of that process so that they see how the sausage is being made and they understand how we got to different the team got to different solutions, so they understand when they're basically presenting it back to their fellow board members, they understand. And also, typically want to have 1 to 2 residents, with the caveat that they need to be residents that can look at the big picture, not only from their perspective, but for the perspective of a future resident, and also that they understand that the master planning process has to be completely, no idea during early in the process is all ideas are on the table. And so, one quick anecdote, I worked with a community where the rose garden, we could not touch the rose garden. We had to work around the rose garden. Well, we ended up moving the rose garden, and the residents were elated because we came up with a much better solution. But if we had talked very early in the process, we were going to move the rose garden, that would have been horrible. So you need to have residents part of this, but also that they understand that they need to not be talking to other residents until you get through the entire process. And then who should be there, and we'll talk a bit about what the criteria to evaluate people, but really, again, we're talking about the different disciplines and the different perspectives. So the market analysts, Rob and his team will tell you, looking at market, they'll look at both the demand side, and it's much more than just the quantitative demand. It's really the qualitative demand is equally important in terms of size of units, type of units, what features and amenities you need to have, pricing contracts. So both qualitative and quantitative demand. The marketing team, they typically have their finger on the pulse of the local buyers, so they're going to get to some of the idiosyncrasies in your market. The design, obviously, the architect is working the program, the site plan, concept design. Pre-construction, it's really critical to have a pre-construction consultant. The question I often get early on, well, are we picking a contractor now? Well, no, you're not. You're really just picking a contractor, hopefully, that will service pre-construction. You're kind of dating before you get married. You may end up working with that contractor, and 95% of the time, the projects I've worked on, the pre-construction was engaged as the contractor, but it's not a done deal. But they're really critical because they're not only providing you with pricing, but also constructability, and also just starting to look at a construction schedule. And no offense, Melissa, one of my rules is never rely on the architect for construction costs. So it's really critical to have a local contractor that's experienced in this field, experienced in the market. The financing is really critical. They're not just telling you rates, but plans of finance, and also the metrics that you want to have. And then running the numbers in project management. A lot of times he's the same person. When projects I work on, I will typically run the numbers and also serve as the project manager. But I've also seen some master planning efforts where that's 2 distinct people. So the running numbers we're going to talk about a couple slides from now. But the project manager's job is really to run interference for the CEO and the local team, because they have day jobs. They run interference on the details, not make decisions, but make sure that things are coming together, and then basically keep everyone on schedule. And then from time to time, you may have some other consultants step in and out from IT or civil landscape. I've had an attorney part of the process where there was some local zoning issues we had to work through. And then finally, the consultant selection. So there's really 3 things. One is experience. So this is not rocket science. You're not hiring people that worked at NASA to work on this, but senior living, there is a lot of subtlety and nuance to this. And it's really critical that the team members have been through this before, so you are not paying them for their learning curve. And this goes for all the team members. So finance, market, everybody should have experience in this. I will say I'll qualify it though. To me, ideally, it's evolving experience. So if you're looking at the architect, their experience, they may have a very deep bench of senior living experience, but I like to see an evolving experience and make sure that the projects that they're doing today are very different than what they were doing 10 or 15 years ago. Because as we all know, the market and the product is evolving very quickly, which is exciting. Secondly, collaboration. Melissa's going to talk a little bit about later in the process, the architect takes center stage. But early in the process, really has to be a true collaborative process. So the architect is not taking center stage at this point, because this is really a collaborative process where everyone is weighing in, and all team members at the beginning are equally important, because you're going to have competing and conflicting interests that need to be resolved, and they need to be resolved in basically a spirit of collaboration. And finally, culture, just to make sure that this team is reflective of your culture as a leadership team and as a community. Probably one of the stark examples I had was many years ago, was working with or not that long ago, a few years ago, working with a community that was solidly middle class, great community, but just solidly middle class, not a lot of pretension. And one of the consultants showed up with pearls and the other person had a Rolex on. And clearly it's like, are they going to understand who this market is and who the customer is serving? So making sure that the team reflects the culture of your organization.
So, it's interesting when we're approached for master planning, a client is often quite excited about getting to the design process because oftentimes that's what master planning means to an organization or to a leader. And as we start asking questions about, well, have you done a market study? Do you have a financial team member on board that can run the numbers with us? And we propose this collaborative approach. Our message is it's best not to jump straight to the design. And the thing that we want to illustrate to you about that is here's the reason why. When you look at a traditional master planning process that is consecutive and is linear, the first thing that you do is a market study. Then typically you'll dive into the design process because again, we're all excited about that. And then after that, and at this point now, you've spent anywhere, it could be 7 and even up to 12 or more months just on those two efforts. Then you get into the financial testing and the modeling and the pro forma. And as that process is completed, you're essentially asking a very simple question. Does it work or does it not? Well, in a linear process, oftentimes you're going to come up with an answer of no, it doesn't work exactly the way you want it to. And so then you start back in the linear process and you start revising and redoing. Well, the bottom line is that time is money. And oftentimes what we're really anxious to do is to get to the best solution as quickly as possible. So when you bring everyone to the table, as we've described, you're constantly asking, does it work? How can it work better? And you're looking at it from all aspects of the project, not just a design perspective, but a design perspective that's informed by the market, that's informed by the financials, that's informed by competition and demand, and that's informed by the outcomes. This whole process is about determining and discovering what are the constraints of the project and what are the opportunities. And again, from every perspective, there are constraints and there are opportunities. And the whole team, the project team, the master planning team, needs to understand sort of the limits of the potential, solutions that we can go to and that can positively impact the organization and the offerings at the outcome.
So Melissa, and I'll add that it's been some of the more painful moments in my career have been probably a half dozen times at least where when you go back to the linear process and then they start assembling the team after they've gone through that, and then I look at it and I say, this is beyond hope. You went down a direction that we just cannot make this work financially. And then they've wasted 4, 5, 6 months of time and tremendous amount of dollars. So again, it's just that first approach is just very problematic.
And Craig, you mentioned some of your most painful experiences. Definitely some of our most painful experiences have been when we get brought into a project after all that master planning and pre-work has been done, and there's really not been any marketing representation at the table. We're saying, okay, Rob, here, you and your team go sell this to the market. And then you go, oh wait, you're charging how much for this? And it's like, oh no, how are we going to make our way through this? So not only is this team-based process, one where it's faster and you can get to that end goal a lot more efficiently cost-wise, but it results in a much more marketable project when you know up front that all team members are aiming for that same end goal. And you'll hear me talk about this a lot as we go through the various stages of our discussion today. But just one quick example that I'm going to refer to a couple of different times during the presentation. Trinity Landing is a blue sky community. The sponsor is Lutheran Services Carolinas. And we did the master planning process with SFCS, not Melissa, but one of our other partners, Tim Mueller. In Wilmington, North Carolina, it's located right on the Intracoastal Waterway. It's a beautiful site, beautiful opportunity. And we were all part of the planning team from the very beginning. We brought the market data, where the opportunity was, where prices could be and couldn't be. We all worked together to make that work. And it was a huge success. We sold, almost 130 residences in only 7 months to be able to get this project to financing. So that's another really strong benefit and outcome is marketability. So step one, you've got your team, you've got the philosophy, everybody's bought into what we're doing here. So let's start on the program piece. Now, a lot of times when people start talking about developing the program, they think in terms of a spreadsheet. Here are the spaces we need. Here's the square footage we're going to need for each space. Here's the cost per square foot. Let's figure out what it's all going to cost. No, before that, this team needs to have a clear understanding of what is the vision for this community. And that's part of what the marketing team, based on the market analysis, needs to be able to bring to the table and say, based on our understanding of this market, this is the niche we need to be in. This is where we can compete and be successful. And this is what we need to offer. We need to think in terms of the experience. We need to provide this experience to the residents at this price point to be successful. So, of course, there are the basics like how many residences, how big they are, how are we going to price them, what contract options do we offer. That is a fundamental piece, but it goes beyond that. We can't just say, okay, we want 2 dining venues. We'll have our, bistro and our regular dining room. Now we need to really explore what do those experiences need to be like, and how will that shape the design of those spaces. Same thing for fitness and wellness. Where do we really want to go there? What are the prospects that we're going to be targeting really expect, and how do we deliver that experience for them? Culturally is becoming more and more important for life plan communities as we move forward. Do we need a performing arts center? Do we need a performance venue, a recording studio, a place for groups to come get together and practice and rehearse? And the lighting is automatic. It can't see me move. And so it thinks I've left the room when indeed I have not. So I have to keep that going. Even to the point of smart home technology, today's prospects, the leading edge of the boomers, those people we're trying to get to move into our communities in 5 years, they are so much more technologically adept and willing than past generations have been. How do we prepare our homes to your expectations? That's all part of the visioning process. The end goal is to ensure that this vision, this positioning that we're aiming to deliver in the market at this price point are in alignment with each other relative to the competition. It's when price and position are in alignment that we offer the best value to the market.
So Rob talked about, again, the experience of, of the dining experience, the health and wellness, the technology, the activities, but there's also more to that as well. So we used to say that the program drove the design, but it's really the design experience has to drive and enhance the program. So as Rob said, you cannot look at this as just a list of space and square footage and maybe linkages, but you've got to look to what the experience you want to create. And so I've worked with clients where we've created an experience statement or a day in the life statement. And what we do is we go through a number of series of questions, and I'll just throw some of these out here. And then all of these, and some of these you might think, well, these are really operational questions, but they really are to pull this off, these are also design questions. So something like, do you want a walkable connection for, so again, getting back to the resident experience, do you want a walkable connection for the residents, either to nearby amenities or surrounding uses? Or are they just basically dependent upon the community bus or their own car to get outside of the community? What's the first impression that you want of the community? Do you want it kind of traditional senior living of, you know, a building back behind a parking lot with a porte cochere, or something that's much more boomer friendly that looks and feels more like mixed use or Main Street or has much more of a neighborhood feel to it? How do you want residents to experience the commons? Because I'm seeing very divergent thinking on that. Do you want it centralized and internally focused, maybe on either side of a hallway? Or do you want it more dispersed and branded with that it feels more like retail and shops rather than the traditional commons experience? How do you want the residents to experience the health center? In many communities, the health center is that place over there, and there's this bright line. And I'm seeing a lot of communities now, it's much more of a blended and an integrated experience with the health center. What's in the typical day of the resident, how much intergenerational experience do you want them to have? What intergenerational opportunities do you want? So that gets to classes and events and lectures and possibly some amenities open to the neighborhood, et cetera. But all that then is tied to the design or it doesn't work. I'm also seeing clients that are wanting more of a diversity of products and diversity of incomes on their campus, which, so besides just apartment cottages, I'm seeing live work units and net zero units and pocket neighborhoods and loft and villas. So that's also the question in terms of the experience that you want. And then what is the experience for the outdoor space? Do you want the outdoor spaces to have the same energy and activity as the indoor spaces? And then also, what is the experience you want of the staff and the caregiver? You know, what experience do they have? And then finally, is there a local community or history or neighborhood story or theming that you want to create a sense of place? And then you also ask those same experiential questions about all of your competitors. What's the experience of the residents of your competitors compared to you? So I'll end this with throwing a question to Rob. If you can create a unique set of experiences at your community that no other competitor has, how does that impact how you can position, sell, and price what you're offering?
There's nothing wrong with being the highest priced community in a market if what you deliver is at a higher level than everybody else. And that, again, that ensures your price and your value and your position are all in alignment. You just need to be able to make sure that there's market depth at that price point, but it absolutely makes it more marketable.
So again, just looking past that kind of that old, what I'll call an old style program, to creating more of an experiential program. What's the experience you're trying to create for the resident? Because that ultimately is what's going to drive the design.
So what you're hearing us focus on is early on in the process, it's about gathering information. And it's gathering all kinds of information. It's qualitative, it's quantitative, it's aspirational. It's also operational. And then from a design team perspective, there's a lot of information that we're going to consider foundational background information that we need to know about the physical environment, the site environment, everything from your building systems to what, you know, zoning will allow, to where do your utilities run, what will code allow us or not allow us to do. And particularly when we are expanding, renovating, as much information that we can gather about the existing buildings are critically important. And so, you know, as we look at that gathering information, what we do is we ask lots and lots of questions. And it's relatively common that, you know, we'll find ourselves asking questions and a client will sort of cock their head and look at you and say, why do you want to know that? And the whole point is that the more that your project team can know, the more that they can understand, the more that they can walk in your shoes and bring, you know, third-party independent experience and knowledge to you, the better that your project will be. And as we ask lots of questions and we listen really, really hard to the answers, for those of you that know me, you know that this image has special meaning. You know, I'm a wiener dog lover. Craig, do you have your coffee cup handy?
Yes.
There you go. So you listen really hard and you keep asking questions. You're uncovering the layers of information that are so important to the team working together to provide good solutions. And it's only after you ask the questions, you listen hard to the answers, you process, that the team can really begin coming up with solutions.
So as Melissa had said earlier, the temptation oftentimes is to start drawing, to start designing. And I love architects, but there's always this inclination to like pull out some butter paper and we'll start sketching some things out. But really the proper step is you're pulling all this information together, you're pulling that program and experience statement together, but then you're doing some of the preliminary financial modeling. So it's the financial modeling work is before the design, but you're basically coming up with creating the model and the framework then within which the architect is going to be designing the project. So we look at the key elements, pulling the baseline operations, the metrics, you know, the capital costs. We start to pull the cash flow, the seed capital projections, and we're also identifying the revenue versus non-revenue producing spaces. People have heard me say ad nauseum about it's an engine in a boxcar, and you've got the engines pulling the boxcars, and within your program you're going to have things that are generating even revenue or debt capacity, and some things that are utilizing that, and those have to be in balance. And then also at this point with the financial model, we're pulling together what I call the levers. So as you go through this, and Rob's going to talk a little bit about, it's going to be lots of multiple iterations, but now you're starting to engage what levers you can pull to keep this project within that range of feasibility. So that can be anything from the number of units, the pricing on the units, whether you're going to do new construction versus renovation, looking at the commons. What is your commons relative to your, if you're adding new independent living or new healthcare that's generating revenue, what percentage of that, what square footage? Can you share spaces? Can some of those spaces be multi-function, or can you offload and look to outside the community? So, and the same questions about the health center. So at this point now, you're modeling, you're doing that first pass at it and say, yes, it's very high level, and maybe even you're using low to high construction costs and low to high assumptions. Yes, this is in the realm of feasibility. So that you take that program experience statement of the numbers, and then you start basically the design process.
So part of this whole iterative approach is that there is constant give and take between the parties, as you've been hearing. And I talked earlier about developing the program, and we spent a lot of time really researching the market and what's the market demand and how many residences can we support and all that. But it never stays the same from that first program to the end. So part of what we have to do from a marketing perspective is come into the process knowing where we can give, where we need to take, where we can go, where we can't go. Always the number of things that come up are, can we increase the number, we need more revenue. Can we increase the number of residences? If so, what's the risk? Can we increase the price point? If so, what's the risk to the project? Do we have to give up some of the amenities we really wanted? Do we need to change what services are included in our base contract fees? And do we need to add additional contract options? Do we need to say direct, if we want to get more entrance fee cash for a project, do we need to structure our pricing so that consumers will tend to choose a higher refund option versus a declining balance one, thus bringing in more money up front? All these kinds of things we have to be prepared to adjust all along the way. Again, Trinity Landing was a great example of this. We started the master planning with a target of 120. It then grew to 130, and by the time we finished the phase one master plan, it was 139. We also increase the entrance fees by almost 10% from what the initial target was. But we did that based on consumer research, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. So we did that with confidence that the market could support that. And it turned out that all these things were so on target that not only did this project go through the first phase of 139 residences, but the pre-sales were so strong that Lutheran Services Carolinas decided to bring in 45 residences that were originally planned to be in phase 2 and do them as part of phase 1 as well. And it's because we really, as a team, the team did a great job of matching the product to the market niche that was available for it.
So as a project team, and in order to inform the process, it's really important that we all understand what are the highest priorities for the community and for the organization. Because there will be points when dynamics will change within the project, and we always have to keep in mind what those highest priorities are. And so, you know, as we look at project feasibility, it's important that you have everyone at the table with all of their different perspectives, and you're running lots of scenarios, because the whole point here is to consider all of the different factors that are involved in a project. Not just as an architect, you know, the physical and design opportunities, but things like, you know, overall cost, revenue generation, debt capacity. And this whole process is about determining what puts the client, the organization, the community in the best position for the future. What scenarios tick the most boxes that accomplish the priorities, that are financially feasible, and that create the resident experience that you're looking to create when you envision the long-term future of your community. So as we move from the master planning and we go into the more detailed piece of master planning, the conceptual design element, one of the approaches that SFCS has used for years is something that we call the collaborative planning process. And I've talked about how important it is to listen and how important it is to assimilate and understand all of the information that we gather. But this is then, once you've done those two steps, when you have the opportunity to start envisioning the future. And that's where you do get to the fun parts of, you know, sketching and doing diagrams and blocking and stacking and visualizing what the future could hold. And as you move forward from there, you run those scenarios, those options, those ideas through an evaluation process. You're asking Rob and his team, okay, does this idea accomplish what we need to accomplish from the market perspective? You're asking Craig and his team, you know, how does this look from an overall financial perspective and schedule? And then from there, you're ready to move forward into the implementation, which would often involve the first phase of a project on a campus. So when you apply this to time and you make it maybe a little bit more pragmatic and less theoretical, in terms of the stages of conceptual design, you're often looking at a 4 to 6 month time period that is most driven by the owner's availability and time to commit to the project. You're looking at oftentimes multiple meetings per month, often one big team meeting per month with interim smaller meetings in between those. And, you know, at the early part of the process, you are going to undertake a multi-day design workshop or planning charrette. And that is where you gather everyone around the table. And what we like to do at SFCS, we actually like to physically use a base model and what we call puzzle pieces. And what's really nice about this approach is that it lets people who are intimidated by sketch paper and markers, who don't want to participate in that way, it lets them participate and share their ideas in a way that they are comfortable with and that it's easy for the entire group to understand. And by having these puzzle pieces, by having a base model, you can quickly and easily test many different ideas and see the benefits of them. And frankly, often the best ideas come from, you know, other participants other than the design team. Our job is to really listen to everyone and then to take all of that information and ideas and to manifest it into solutions that we can consider for the future. So from the design workshop, Charette, we often come back with those ideas and we begin sketching and exploring and testing using the pen and paper that may not be so comfortable for others. And from there, as the process progresses, we start getting into more detailed development. We start looking at the project three-dimensionally in many different layers. We start looking at it from a floor plan perspective and how circulation might work and where connections would occur. And, you know, towards the end of the conceptual planning process, what we all want to see is a vision for the future and what we're working towards. And so through the use of visualization software, modeling, and taking all of that knowledge that we've gained and that we've worked together on and the experience we want to create, we can come up with graphics that really represent what the project wants to be and look like in the future.
So what's the role in honor? And actually, I had two comments on what Melissa said regarding that process. One, as the project management guy, I would strongly recommend that you lay out that process from start to end right up at the front and have those meetings scheduled. Do not do it, and I've seen this happen, do not do it as kind of this open-ended process. There should be, and ideally there's a board meeting at some point that we want to deliver our results by, because I found that urgency, ironically, really helps the creative process. I think that, so you need to have that sense of urgency and know what's going to happen, so you're going to lay out to hit those benchmarks. The other thing I'd just really highly recommend is Melissa talked about kind of that fact-finding stage, and then you're doing that envision stage. If you can hold at least one of those envision meetings off-site somewhere, ideally at some place that's architecturally or historically or culturally significant, I find that helps, because really you're blue sky thinking here, and and it's so hard when you're in my opinion, you're at the community and the CEO is getting pulled out and the CFO is getting pulled out and department head's got an emergency they got to respond to. And you really want, it's almost that first meeting is almost more, when you're talking about the experience and you're talking about looking at those initial conceptual design, it's almost like more like a retreat. So I really recommend having it offsite if you can. So the role in honor, so again, at this point, as Melissa said, that the architect is taking center stage, but everyone else is still very critical to the process. So you have to make sure that the design is in line with what the market wants, that the financial benchmarks are being hit. Early in the process, working with the CFO and the board, we create what we call our sleep number. So what is the sleep number that you can live with? And I've worked with boards that are more aggressive than others. Well, we want to have a certain minimum debt coverage, or minimum days cash in hand, or minimum cash to debt. And so we need to make sure at this point, as this is evolving, that we are continually to evolve the model and literally doing it in the room while Melissa's out sketching things out. I'm oftentimes in the back working with the pre-con person, and we're literally running these things so that we can say to make sure that we're tracking. And then also at this point, you're now starting to pull together the elements of schedule and phasing and constructability as well.
So marketing plays a really critical role during this iterative part of the process. Craig early on described who's all part of the planning team, and you had leadership and board members and staff and department heads and residents and industry professionals, et cetera. But there's a really critical constituent that is not at the table through this process. That's who do you want to buy this product? Who do you actually expect to write you a check? And that's marketing's job during this process, is to be the voice, to be the consumer advocate, to be the voice, to protect that market niche that we're going after, and ensure that all the decisions that are done, all the decisions that are made, keep the project in line with that initial vision and ensure the marketability. So along those lines, the last step before launching into actual pre-sales and full development is consumer research. And what we do is a unique type of process we call community research events. You can think of these as focus groups on steroids. We will bring in up to 50 households to an event. And ideally, we'd love to have 3 or 4 events so that we have close to 200 participants in this process. What this does is it gives us the benefit of both a quantitative analysis, where we're comfortably able to say 75% of the people that were here felt this way about this. And so we're really going to have to respond to that. But it also gives us the ability to complement that 75% with a qualitative point. And this is why they felt that way. We can ask a question, they have the transponders, people can answer, we can immediately put the results of how they answer the question up on screen and go, this is how you felt. Tell us about why you felt that way. So it really brings the best of both processes. We organize these events so that we start with basically an overview of what a life plan community is, because many people that are coming may not have a good sense of that. We talk about the sponsor, then we walk through a lot of information about the project, having information that builds on each step as it goes until at the very end, we're presenting details about pricing and contract options and making sure they understand that, because the ultimate outcome of these research events is to determine, will they buy this product at this price point at this location? These have been a hugely important part of many development processes, and we get a variety of different reactions to them. It can vary widely depending on how the planning process has gone and issues and concerns that the team had to address along the way. We've had clients where we overshot the market. The residences were too big and too expensive, and we came back and said, okay, we're going to need to shrink everything by about 100 square feet. That'll enable us to cut our entrance fees by $50,000 on average, and our monthly fees by $500 a month. That's a pretty major step. And by the way, Melissa's going to talk in a little bit about how making these kinds of decisions this early in the process is a far easier and less expensive time to make those kind of adjustments than when you get much further in. But we've also had occasions, like I mentioned with Trinity Landing, where we went, wow, we're actually going to be able to push our pricing up and not have to value engineer things out of the project, because the market is responding really positively to what we've put together. We've had all sorts of feedback that changes various things, and we keep seeing more and more of this next generation consumer. They need space to store their bike, they want a place to put their kayak, and we're having to integrate these new and different things into our plan.
So fortunately for everyone watching, Rob has a better sense of style and graphics than I do, because what I wanted to put on here was this giant Gantt chart, which I personally love Gantt charts, but everybody else, for some reason I can't understand, hate them. But at this point now, you're ready for development. So you're going to create that Gantt chart, and you're going to break down all of the disciplines of development, design steps, pre-construction steps, approval steps, pre-marketing, your pre-operational cost, finance. You're going to put that all into a schedule. And kind of like we talked about with the master planning, where you look to the project manager to say, here's our beginning, middle, and end of this, and here's our deadlines, and here's our milestones. Your project manager now can do that because you've got the elements. And as Rob said, hopefully you've got a plan now that you can take to market and you can proceed with, because you've kind of wrung out some of the issues and the concerns, and you tested in the market, you've tested financially. So now you can create that schedule of development to construction and financing, and then to occupancy. And it's really critical now. Same thing is that you have those biweekly meetings, and you're starting a formal development process, and everyone knows what those milestones are out 3, 4, 5 months in advance. And also, one of the recommendations I make to clients is that you have a series of go, no-go steps through that process. And it could be at the end of the schematic design estimate, the design development estimate, or hitting a certain pre-sales. But have those go, no-go, which are very formal steps, ideally going back to the board. So you're not asking the board for full approval, you're asking for the board for this first step. And then at that point, you're retesting the feasibility, you're retesting your numbers. And just as importantly, you're retesting, you're going back to that experience statement or that day in the life statement, and you're saying, yeah, this design is doing this, is accomplishing what we want. So you're just basically doing a gut check for everything at that point.
All right, so now we've walked through all those steps, and before we shift into the Q&A part of our session today, I did ask both Melissa and Craig to share any broad words of wisdom that would be helpful, hopefully, to all of you as you go to begin your master planning process. Melissa?
So I wanted to satisfy Craig's need for charts with my words of wisdom, but I did want to share a couple of things that I think are really, really important. One is that while this looks like a complex chart, and feel free to study it more later, the point of this is that early in the process, the team has the most ability to influence the outcome of the project. And so testing ideas and committing to the direction that the project is going to go early on is the best approach, because the further that you get along in the process, the more changes in the direction cost. And you can see how that, as you know, your ability to impact cost goes down as you proceed further beyond master planning throughout the course of the project, and the cost of changes goes up. So that is why we feel that it is so important to do the right work with the right team members early on in the process. And then another kind of chart, nod to Craig, the Venn diagram. And you've heard the saying before that, you know, here's what we all want, right? We want it to be good, we want it to be cheap, and we want it to be fast. But the reality of it is that, you know, investing the right amount of time with the right team members and the right information is going to get you to the best outcome as an owner operator. And, you know, the reality of it is, you've heard pick two, you know, achieving all three of those often does not exist. So we encourage you wholeheartedly to use this approach. Craig?
So I can provide words of wisdom, but what I can provide is, just from a guy that's been through a lot of these, I can provide just 4 quick final comments. One, follow this process. It works. If you're following this process, my experience has been that the result, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, because you really do get that benefit of the collaboration and the all these, basically you're getting all the disciplines together, you're coming with something which really works. Second point is, be mindful of trends. Trends are fast moving right now. The industry, the design, everything is moving very quickly. So just be mindful of those. Third, really focus on creating that experience statement, or that day in the life statement, and benchmark to that. And then final point, you're creating an asset that's going to be around for 50 years, and it's going to be serving consumers both today and well into the future. So don't recreate your last project, and by the same token, don't let your consultants recreate their last project. One of my CEOs I've worked with for many years, and she's and it basically transformed the campus, just amazingly, probably one of the best in the state. Now, she always says, fortune favors the bold. And so I would encourage you to go through this. Don't be afraid to be bold, and again, create something new and be really listening to what your consumer wants, because what this next generation wants is going to be different than the folks that we've served in the past.
And lastly, sort of the same thing I've been sharing throughout. Ensure that that consumer is represented at the planning table. And that's really primarily marketing's job throughout the process. By ensuring that you're meeting the goals that you set out with from the beginning of price point, experience, it really maximizes the marketability of the project. I think the biggest mistake we see way too often is pricing just gets pushed up to cover the cost of a project. If pricing gets pushed too high, you may not have a project. So always look for other ways to make the project work financially without just pushing pricing up to cover. With that, I would like to thank, we will go into Q&A in just a second, but I'd like to again thank Craig and Melissa for taking their time to help plan and pull this together today. And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us and listening in today. And again, I'd also like to, just say thank you to all of our community leaders and staff members out there for everything you're doing during these really challenging times to keep our communities going. It is appreciated, I believe, way more than you may know. All right, we will begin on the questions. And again, the most popular question is always, will we send out a copy of the presentation? Yes, we will. We'll send out a full recording to everyone. And so the first question, Craig, I'm not quite sure whether, I think this would probably come to you first. What level of contingency do you typically include at the master planning phase of a project?
So, actually, there's three types of contingency you're going to hold in your capital cost budget. One is in that initial construction budget, you're going to have basically a design contingency. And at this level, that could be 10% or more because the design has not evolved. Then you'll typically have a change order contingency, which typically is anywhere from 3 to 5%, and that will stay the same through the whole process. And then finally, you're going to have a project level contingency. And early on, I like to see that as a high level of 5 to 7 because you haven't vetted out all of the issues yet. But that also, like the design contingency, will go down with time as the design evolves and as all the kind of pieces and parts evolve. Then that project level contingency will also be decreased.
Yeah, I think, Craig, one of the important things that you and I have talked about is kind of the way that the contingency determination is, it's almost like walking a tightrope. You don't want to fall on the side of, over contingencying the
Right.
project to where it becomes infeasible. And you also have to constantly make sure that you're not under contingencying the project where it's going to end up, becoming an issue of feasibility later in the project. So it's a very fine line, and it can vary really project to project depending on the amount of renovation, whether it's completely new construction. So important element of making sure that you have got cushion, but not too much cushion.
Exactly.
Great, thank you. The next one actually is targeted to me. You mentioned several times the importance of getting pricing right. How do you determine what the right pricing for a project is? Well, there's really a fairly detailed science behind pricing. There are a lot of elements that go into it. The most important for an entrance fee community is home values, because as many of you know, prospects are really reluctant to go into personal assets or stock investments and liquidate those to have to pay a high entrance fee. So the better alignment we have with home values, the greater the opportunity for success. In particular, like if you want to offer a high refund, 90% refundable contract, ideally you don't want that to be above 120 or 130% of the median home value in a market. If it goes higher than that, you just can, every bit higher it goes, you restrict the size of the market that's willing to pay that much, and that increases the risk of the project. Another factor is obviously the competition. How are they priced and what options do they have? We have to look closely at that. The value proposition. It's okay to be a highest priced product, as we said earlier, as long as what you're offering supports that, and as long as there's enough market depth at that price point of either home values or income levels in the market to be able to support that. And lastly, it also requires carefully looking at how you price various contract options relative to each other. I talk with my hands a lot, but if you want people to select the high refund contract option, you need to have a relatively narrow gap between the two, so people don't have to pay that much of a premium for it. If that's not important, you can have a much higher gap. And if you want to drive people to declining balance, if that high refund plan is priced more than 60% higher, which by the way is not actuarially equivalent, if it's priced more than 60% higher, you're not going to get many takers on it. They're going to go for that declining balance plan. So there are lots of factors to juggle there. Next question. Would be interested in your thoughts and experience about senior living communities designed with people of color and diverse cultures in mind. That's a great question. Any panelists want to jump at that? I'll be happy to take a first shot, but.
Well, you know, my thoughts, Rob, are that in terms of the culture and diversity, I think that you know, traditionally our industry predominantly has been focused on a smaller portion of the whole population. And I believe that it's important as an industry that we begin to become more inclusive and to meet the needs of more seniors from a financial perspective, a culture perspective, diversity perspective. I believe that it's important to immerse yourself in the culture and the goals and the lifestyle of the population that you're looking to serve. And as a designer, you know, understanding the culture, understanding the values, understanding the mission, and what, you know, what makes life special is something that would be really important as a designer. So that would be kind of my first thoughts. Rob?
I agree. We've worked with several communities over the years, particularly the last 5 to 7 years, who have set a particular goal driven by the board of increasing the diversity of their community. And most of the focus of that has really been on trying to increase the African American population in communities. And I have to say they haven't been that successful. Melissa, I think part of it is because they focused on thinking, hey, we have a great community here where we all are. Let's go out and invite them to come and be part of our community. And in that sense, we're not doing the listening and understanding, just as you said, of what's important to those constituents. I believe as our market of, you know, age 70, 75, 80 plus just has continued to grow over these couple of years, that there are going to be more and more opportunities for niche communities that are truly designed to meet a very specific need. In some cases, that could be communities of color. There's a community, I'm drawing a blank on the name, but it was affiliated, I think, with the Big Bethel AME Church in Atlanta that was developed, you know, really solely for the African American community and has been successful. There are communities that have been developed for Indians, and no, not American Indians, but, you know, India. and they're really tailored to that culture. Kendall is currently developing a project on the West Coast that's really has it's a partnership with the Zen Institute of San Francisco. And so it has much more of that Zen and sort of Buddhist philosophy to it. I think there's a great opportunity for niche communities, but Melissa, as you said, the key is listening to them and finding out what's important and not thinking that we can just take what we offer today in our existing communities and that that's going to translate into the other cultures.
And just to add that, I've worked with 2 communities that similar to the communities you've talked about, Rob, that have done outreach and been successful, but really it's ultimately is listening and also doing outreach. And to me, I'm like to communicate the message that everyone is welcome at these communities, but a lot of it is listening and listening to what the message we're sending. And again, I've worked with a couple of communities that have been able to successfully do that, but again, it's just a different approach.
All right, the next question is, what do you see as the current trends? And considering COVID, how is this affecting trends? Now, each of us could answer that from our own perspective. I'll just start and say, we're seeing things all across the board. And I would see from a marketing perspective that it's really more dependent on the community and how they're responding than it is on the market. We have communities that are saying, okay, we see the environment around us changing. We're going to evolve. We're going to adapt. We've had communities successfully go through pre-sales of an expansion, 10% pre-sales at a very fast pace, totally virtually. We've had other communities that kind of got scared, like, I don't know what to do in this environment, and stepped back and didn't do much, and census has dropped. So we're really trying to help communities be more aggressive. But beyond that, I think, and Melissa, I may defer to you next. I think at the very beginning, we're saying a lot of things that we're seeing now are suggesting new ways that communities need to evolve in design thinking for the future. Maybe you want to touch on that.
Sure. I don't know how many of the audience was able to attend the webinar that we gave. Yes, I think it was yesterday, the day before, about actually the design impacts of COVID that we're seeing. And it's interesting, in terms of kind of the macro view, we're seeing organizations respond sort of all over the boards. We have the spectrum of organizations who are hunkered down in a defend and a protect in the current moment and day perspective. And then we have clients and organizations who see this as an opportunity to leap forward and get ahead of the competition. And so they're putting sort of the pedal to the metal in moving forward. In terms of specific design implications, one of the biggest things that we're seeing right now is interest and investment in mechanical systems from an infection control perspective. Right now, infection control is kind of the ruling the day, from material selections, from cleaning approaches, from air quality. So both in terms of opportunities to retrofit mechanical systems, and how mechanical systems in terms of design may be influenced in the future is a big focus. Beyond that, almost throughout the entire built environment, we will see impacts of kind of this heightened sensitivity and realization of the impact that infections and virus can have. From dining, food delivery approaches, to how entry and access is provided to communities, what kind of screening is undertaken. So it's really quite extensive, and it's still evolving. Quick thing for anyone who's interested to learn more about that, you're welcome to contact me relative to white papers we've written that may be of help.
Great, thank you, Melissa. Next question, Craig, you are referenced specifically on this, but again, I'm sure we'll maybe each have a perspective. In addition to market data, financial feasibility, and warranted investment, can you share experiences about how the story, quote unquote, helps to shape the built environment? You did hit on the centrality of targeted experiences, but how does storytelling and theming fit into the equation? Craig touched briefly on this aspect. Can you elaborate?
Well, I did not plant that question because that's an issue that's really near and dear to my heart. But I've literally probably been in, not just driven by, but I've been into at least 1,000 communities in my career. And of those, there's really just a handful that I stepped back and look at and say, you know, that's a special place. That was a place that really resonated with me. And those are the ones, and look to Melissa and the architects, is that you do create a sense of place, a sense of story, a sense of theming. And it can be the local history, the local culture, the local just archetypal images that really just create a sense of place. And I think that that can be the secret sauce, that above everything else, you layer that on top, that when you go to these communities and they just feel a specialness about them, to me, it ultimately is because they're tying into something deeper than just for providing housing and services, but they're tying into the local culture of the region. And again, I've seen some in the Midwest that they're just kind of into the Midwestern themes, and in the Pacific Northwest. That to me, it just connects people in a way that you can feel it more than see it sometimes. But again, it just really works and it resonates. So.
Yeah, Craig, I mean, I think an element of that is true authenticity, you know, having an authentic environment that reflects the true nature and culture of, you know, the residents and the staff and the organization. And frankly, there's a little bit of magic thrown in there too. Oftentimes you can start to feel this early on in a project. And it's really a magical thing to see that come all the way through a project to fruition, and really make something special.
Great, thank you. Craig, this one might be coming your way too, although either one of you can jump in, and whoever takes it first, go for it. But it's a great question about managing expectations. How can a master planning team keep stakeholders satisfied when they are too eager for the eye candy too early, when it should be more perspiration than inspiration? Is it smart to still visualize the future, which I assume means go into more visual, you know, deliverables, Melissa? I'm assuming that's what that means. Is it smart to still visualize the future to satisfy the itch, keep folks excited?
So I have one thought on that. That's a great question, because early on in the process, and again, Melissa, don't take offense, architects sometimes can't help themselves. They just have to start drawing and designing. And I think the way you can temper that is, again, getting back to, if you're creating a schedule for the master planning process and say, here's step one, here's step two, step three, or here's the steps we're going to follow, so that people know that it's step whatever. Now we're going to start designing, and that's the eye candy, and that's the exciting part. But they know that prior to that, we've run the financial model at a high level programmatically. We've talked about the words, the experience, and we just know there's a time and place for that, and it's coming. And then like Melissa, that's kind of the exciting part, is when you start doing the actual design. So I think hopefully, as long as people know it's coming, they can be patient to wait as you get through those very important preliminary steps.
You know, I'll comment from my perspective. This is the dilemma that every project, every leadership team faces. And there's not a right answer. Often, especially early in the process, my advice is often less is more, because things are so fluid and they are changing so rapidly. And it's sort of a joke, but not a joke, that the first thing that you show someone is what they will always remember, both in terms of design and in terms of cost. So I think it's really important to manage those expectations. Oftentimes, my advice is to share with those people who are really excited and interested, Information about the process. What are we doing? How are we doing it? So that you're informing and you're sharing. But I think that you want to be careful in terms of true imagery of a project that will continue to evolve, sharing too much too early.
I'll just add one more thought, and that's there's a way to address this that I've seen in a number of projects. And Melissa, you and other SFCS architects have definitely done this with projects where we've been part of with you. And that's to show representative images of other places or spaces. They may be senior living, they may not be senior living, that represent a look and a feel of what the experience is that we're targeting. It's not specifically designed for that client, but it meets some of that need for what might this actually look like, what feel, and it helps ensure that that vision and experience side of things, that everybody's aiming for the same outcome. So I think that's been a helpful way to accomplish that too.
Mm-hmm.
This appears to be the last question we have. So if any of you, have anything else you'd like to add, please add it into the question box. But this one is a follow-up to that question. I recognize this is complex. Oh, this is a follow-up to me. I just sort of read ahead. Where can I go to learn more about the science of pricing? How do I up my game and knowledge in both entrance fee and rental pricing strategies establishment? All right. We try not to do too strong a self-plug here. And this isn't really a self-plug. I'm not sure, I can't see who asked the question where I am. What I would ask is that the Loving Company team that is setting up and monitoring all this, if you know, or whoever asked the question, if you could shoot me an email at the address here. Loving Company did an extensive study in partnership with Ziegler about 4 years ago on pricing in senior living communities. It's about a 16-page study. It goes into all facets of contract options, relative pricing, pricing relative to home values. And without trying to sprain my shoulder, patting ourselves on the back, to me, it's the most comprehensive overview of senior living pricing I've seen. Now, it does focus on entrance fee communities, not so much on rental. But if you'll reach out to me, or it looks like I'm seeing a chat here that we do have your information, I will send you a copy of that report, and then we'd be happy to talk further with you. That appears to be our last question. We're just a little before 1:30 once again. I'd like to thank all of you who stuck with us this long and asked the questions and been really engaged today. It was really personally exciting to me to see how many people were really thinking of planning and master planning and the attendance that we got here today. We had more than 200 people register for this, and I just never expected that in this COVID environment. So thank you for all the time that you've spent with us when we know you're crunched on so many other things. And also thank you again to Craig and Melissa, the amount of work they do preparing for these things, volunteering their time and information. It's pretty substantial, and we really appreciate that you're willing to help share your insights and experience with the field as well. So with that, we will sign off, and thank you all to everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.